Welcome to the In Chamber. I'm your host, Tom Schumann. It's time for True Confessions, and it'll all make sense in a moment when we introduce our guest. Confession number one for me. At age 30, I was in the early stages of my second term at the Herald Bulletin newspaper in Anderson. I'd switched from sports to the news side of the operation, but I still wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do with my career. My wife would probably argue that that's still the case today, and in fact, she'd probably argue the point of, did I ever really grow up? So there's a story there. Confession number two, I really don't like the early mornings. That alarm, which is on the phone today for most of us, is not my friend. Although I do bicycle to work a fair amount of time, it's safe to say I would not qualify for that old Army slogan of, we do more before 9 a.m. than most people do all day. Although we are sitting here before 9 a.m., so we'll take credit for that. All that brings us to our guest today, who fits in none of those categories that I just mentioned. By age 30, she had become president of a company, SMARI, a market research and insights organization. And we'll let her explain in a few moments the passion she has outside work that keeps her busy, sometimes in the early hours and certainly throughout the day. Katie Ittenbach, welcome to the In Chamber.
Thanks, Tom.
Pleasure. We're really glad you're here with us today. As we talked before we started recording, we're going to talk a little bit of business, we're going to talk a little bit of personal, but it all ties into I think, just going to be a fascinating listen for our audience on your career and the work that you're doing. We usually start with the business. We'll get there in a second, but I make reference to early mornings. I'm not the early morning person. You are. There's this famous blog post that you referenced. Talk a little bit about a little bit of your passion outside work that keeps you busy.
And it does certainly keep me busy. So as this blog is referenced, I do have a ranch. It is 60 acres. On that ranch are horses and cattle, soon to be chickens. So it's kind of a hobby ranch homestead. And it keeps me busy from the morning. So my alarm goes off somewhere around 5-ish.
5-ish.
5-ish, it depends. I do have trouble getting up, but I have to. It just depends on how many snooze alarms I can get away with. So between 1 and 5 is the range typically there. But some mornings are easier than others, so I can get away with sleeping in a little bit more. Some mornings, especially in the winter, can be a little bit more tough.
So how did you grow up on a ranch? Did you acquire this later? Talk about a little bit of the background there.
So I kind of did. So I didn't grow up early years on a ranch, but about when I was 10, we moved out to a 10-acre horse ranch. So, and that was really my responsibility at age 10 was taking care of the horses. So it was, I started riding when I was 6, fell in love with horses before I can remember. So I knew how to take care of them, but that was kind of an early responsibility that has just stuck with me.
So the blog post I referenced, you wrote about being in a high-level business meeting fairly early in the morning, I believe, and someone asking you if you did anything fun or interesting that weekend. What was the answer?
Yeah, I think I took them back a little bit when I said, oh, I did. I helped deliver a calf at 3 a.m. this morning. And, it's you don't, sometimes in the world that I'm in, you don't run into a lot of agricultural world. So I think they weren't necessarily expecting to hear that, especially coming out of me. Corporate attire, Tom, you can see me now. It doesn't necessarily lend itself to muck boots and helping calf.
So what kind of reaction did you get then, and maybe in general, as people learn about your passion, your hobby, your work outside of business? What kind of reactions do people have?
Honestly, I think people are extremely interested because if you're not exposed to agriculture and what that world looks like, you have no idea what it looks like. So there's a lot of questions and interest in that, but I think it also brings something very human and real to another side of person. So if you're there making a big presentation, you kind of have this very distant look. But then when they hear something a little bit more human and real, I think everybody can relate. It's same talking about family and kids and what people can relate to. This is just something a little bit off topic than normal.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk business. I mentioned SMARI, based on the north side of Indianapolis. Tell us a little bit about the company and the type of work you do.
Sure. So SMARI was founded in 1983. I usually explain this in two parts because market research can be a very nebulous, intangible type object. So we are a full-service primary research firm, and basically what that means is we help clients with their market research needs. So they will hire us for that. The most relatable side of market research is probably the surveys that everybody gets. Take a link, tell us how we're doing, all the way to focus groups is another big common side of it. So we do all of that, but to kind of add our little differentiator to that, it takes a lot more of a consulting side. So it's not just the data, it's not just here it is, good luck with it. It's more of interpreting what that is. This is what you should do with it, the strategy, the critical thinking behind it. Because there's a big mix of market research firms out there. A lot of them have kind of a black box model. Here it is, let's plug your brand into it, and here's the data on the back end. Ours takes kind of a more strategy, custom approach to solving a little bit more complex problems.
So, Katie, this is a company that your father started, as you mentioned, 1983, and you've been with the organization for a number of years. Talk about the roles you've had, how that's changed, and where you've evolved to become president now.
So it wasn't as planned as I would like to say it was. So even in college, so I went to Purdue University, and I was undecided for 2 years until they basically said, you have to decide now. You have to go into a major and a division. So I actually chose business because I figured I could do anything with that. So since I don't know what I'm doing, I might as well just do business. So I stepped into that, and then I graduated in 2008. There was that little recession thing that was going on at the time.
That was kind of big news at the time, wasn't it?
It was. So I actually started with my dad's company because I figured he'd push me harder and faster than anybody else would. And it'd be a great opportunity to then figure out what I want to do. So I actually started as an intern in the company, and I just never left. It was something that I didn't know I was going to like, didn't know I was going to be good at. And they do say market research is often the accidental career because you don't necessarily always go to college, but I'm going to go be a market research analyst someday. And it stuck. So I've had every role from intern. I think and I joke with Kelly, our programmer at SMARI, that the only role I haven't done in the company is hers. I do not program surveys. That's an art of its own for her.
A little more about the company. It's small but mighty is how I would describe it. I don't know if I would hope that's accurate. Organization was on our best places to work list, the chamber program that we run a few years ago. And talking with Casey here, who works with you on the public relations communications side, mentioned the only thing really that's keeping the company off the list now is you got to have 15 full-time employees, which you don't have because you work with a lot of people outside the organization. But talk about that small but mighty. How does an organization of that size accomplish so much?
I really like that term, small and mighty.
I
think I'm going to use that, Casey. I think that might be another marketing thing
All
out
right.
there. And actually, I've been told small and mighty because when you see 1,500-pound cattle, and me trying to handle them, small and mighty comes into play. So that's Worklife right there.
So if I made some small contribution to the future success in marketing, it's been a good day.
Yes, we'll make a little asterisk for you.
Well, I don't need credit. But talk about that, how that applies. The organization does so much with a limited number of people.
It does, and a lot of that is technology. And our power is really in our human capital and just the way we think. So we're different. We solve the complex problems, the low incidence type of audience of who we're trying to get, because it's really how you can think through the problem and problem solving. The technology and the fundamentals of the market research process can be really pretty streamlined and more cost effective in that. So, the overhead that we have to run what, used to be a 50-line call center so that we could do phone surveys. Now there is no call center and it's online surveys. So it's very efficient in how we can run that, which also means we don't need as many employees to run that. So we really are down to the critical thinking employees that help operate and bring that kind of added consulting to the research.
You mentioned focus groups a little bit earlier. Talk about them a little more. How have they changed? How have they evolved? Is today's focus group anything like what it was 11 years ago, 10 years ago, or
So
How are they different?
it's a little bit of both, and we've been kind of terming this qual 2.0. So, the qualitative side, which is focus groups, it's not necessarily data driven. It's more of the tangible seeing your audience in front of you. So we still do in-person focus groups. You have that two-way mirror. You can see your focus group, moderators. That's still very much part of it. But, once a client discovers online focus groups, it's hard to ever want to go back. So just the time that it takes to go from city to city and do focus groups, now you can just jump on at home in your PJs and moderate an online focus group. So it takes on a completely different form, national-based audience, so you're not just in a 30-minute drive time around a certain facility. And then there's the whole other side that's now kind of buzzword of jobs to be done, user experience, user design, and really trying to know the consumer, because it's all about a more personal sell rather than a big group or a big segment type sell. So it's really becoming a little bit more. It's kind of qualitative went in and out. So it was really big qualitative, and then we discovered online surveys and went quantitative, and now it's coming full circle to qualitative again, just because it's so tangible. I mean, you can see your consumer in front of you reacting and doing things that you didn't know they did, or a secret workaround that you can actually problem solve for. So great ideation solutions for that.
About client expectations, I'm sure those again have evolved, and what are clients looking for today that maybe they weren't in the past to obviously be competitive and stay on the top of their game in their industry.
Yeah, it has very much evolved. So even just 10 years ago, when I was kind of just starting out with market research, we did a lot of customer satisfaction surveys and employee satisfaction surveys, and some of the things that are a little bit easier to solve type problems. But now that can be internalized. There's ways to do your own research. You have your own customer database. You can do that yourself. And the kind of the old black box model of research, we'll handle your data, plug your brand in, do our black box thing, and then spit out data for you. That can be automated and duplicated. People don't buy into that as much. So that has kind of gone away. And now it's really about the hard to solve problems. So the problems that we solve today versus 10 years ago are completely different. They're not as very specific of why are they unsatisfied or why are they doing this. It's more of why is our retention lower? How do we build a new product? I mean, it's becoming a lot more of a global question where it might not be as clear to the client how to exactly set up a research design and process to answer that. And it takes a lot more capacity that they might not have time to, or they don't even have the resources for, to have that kind of critical thinking just to focus on one question. So though that's what we're getting now, and it does make it a lot more challenging. That's why we've kind of ramped up more of the human capital, just thinking power side of the business versus just kind of the production side.
It probably varies, I'm sure, a great deal by project, but is there a general normal time frame for an engagement with a client? As you said, you add that consulting aspect to it. You're not just providing numbers and research, you're working on solutions. Is there a typical time period involved?
There is, kind of. So I would say on average, I mean, we could have I always put out 4 to 6 weeks. It's a great kind of timeline to put on a project. But we do have clients where, Monday morning, we need to have this answer and we need to present it to the board by Friday. And the thing is, we can do that. Technology allows you to do that. And being small and mighty, we have the flexibility to do that. So it can be done. And then there's some projects that are, 6 months to a year, just depending on, we call them immersion teams, where you can observe, an online diary and have consumers record over a period of time. So it depends on the project. Technology allows you to move pretty fast, but it more often falls 4 to 6 weeks.
Let's talk a little bit about you. So you mentioned you graduated Purdue 2008. We should throw in that MBA from Ball State, right? No, Ball State.
Absolutely.
Grad. So we don't let always want to give the Cardinals some love. But you graduated and have evolved to, as we say now, president of the company. So you're taking over a family business. Was that the dream of a lifetime? As you said, you weren't exactly sure that's what you were going to do, or talk a little bit about some of the pressures maybe that come with that, something your father started 35 years ago, 36 years ago, and nurtured. Talk about your balancing act there of moving into the leadership role?
So that's an interesting one. And honestly, the words that just come to mind right now is my dad saying, well, here it is, don't mess it up. I think he actually had a choice word in there that we won't talk about, but basically that was there is pressure of 35 years, and if we made it last this long, let's keep it going. So it's been, it is a dream, and it is an opportunity of a lifetime. I don't think a lot of people get that kind of opportunity, but the pressure is large, as running any kind of company will be, regardless of what age or what kind of opportunity that is. It involves growing up a little bit faster, I would say. So, you can't go home and complain about your job or your work because you're complaining about yourself. So if you have a problem, you're the one that's going to have to fix it. So there's no point in complaining. I mean, it just kind of takes on a different kind of role of its own. But it really wasn't too bad of a transition. My dad and I work similar. So the way that we like research, what we like about research, how we do it, the consultative side, we're basically the same. So that has not changed. That's been the heart of what we've been since for 35 years. So that was easy. So we haven't changed the product. It's gotten more complicated. I think the more of the change is making your own culture. So obviously the culture today is different than it was 10 years ago. Millennial generation does change things, work-life balance, and just how to attract and retain talent. There's the war of talent is real everywhere right now. So changing the culture and having it be kind of your team, it was really the biggest transition in that.
So I mentioned earlier, at age 30, I still wasn't quite sure what I was going to do and where I was going to go. At age 30, you were president of the company. Talk about that. What were some of the challenges that came with that? And was it easier because you had been there in other roles prior to that?
I think it was. So it is easier to help employees and mentor them when you know their job. So I think that always makes it easier. It also, my dad, he was a huge mentor. So if you get along with your dad in the business, because that can be a whole other thing of its own. I did. So I was lucky there. My dad was great, and he was such a mentor through it, which can be good and bad because your dad can be more honest with you than typically probably your normal boss would be. So, but it pushes you harder. So he basically taught me what leadership is. The downsides behind the scenes of what leadership is. He introduced me to the network, taught me everything. I mean, that part was, he made it easy as he probably possibly could have.
So Katie, obviously you're 33 years old, you're female, a millennial, a company leader, you've got work-life balance, you must have it down to a T to be able to do everything you do. What's the message you would provide to people out there listening? How do you successfully combine all of those factors?
I would say that's like the duck on water. I do not have it down to a T. I don't know. And if anybody says they do, I don't know. They are more powerful than I am. It's not. I would say it's kind of a balance, but that's just because it's all kind of mixed together. So really, for me, it's what's screaming louder at the time really directs what I need to be focusing on. So there is a certain point where you could work nonstop, and there's always work to be done, always more sales to be had. But at a certain point, you have your own self-care, and you can tell when that switch point is, and that's when you kind of can switch over. And that's what, that the blog that we referenced earlier was on, of make time for what you need and to take care of that self-care. So whatever that is, making sure that you have that personal side that kind of reboots you and gives you kind of a clean slate. And that's what the ranch does. It's kind of off the beaten path. Animals don't talk back. I mean, kind of, but not in the same way people do. They're pretty honest, so it's a good kind of break from that. So that's that's the best concept of work-life balance, and just really making sure that you use your time wisely. So if you talk to anybody, the first thing they'll say is, I'm busy, I can't do more. But people can figure out how to do more if you really want it. So it's, how do you want to divide that time up? And I kind of made the joke in that blog of, I have no idea what's on TV. I have no idea what the next hot topic is. I'm so off the rate. If it's not kind of market research in corporate world or ranch, I am so out of the loop. But that's just because it's not as important to me to stay kind of current and watch TV. It's other things. So making time for just what you really value.
And being extremely focused on what you're doing at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting, this podcast will release 2 days before our 30th annual awards dinner. our business leader of the year is Chuck Surak of Sweetwater Sound, one of the largest online music retailers in the country up in Fort Wayne. And the opportunity to interview him in the last couple months, and he not only runs that business, which he founded 40 years ago, he now owns about a dozen other companies. He's on a number of corporate boards. And I asked him the question similar about time and how he divides. And he says he's just all in on whatever he's working on at the moment. And that sounds a similar philosophy that you have to do, that you might have a variety of things, but just focus and give your all on that at the moment.
Yep, and be in the moment. And I think that can be small and large things. So when you're in a meeting knowing that you have 10 other things after this, you're wasting time if you're not in that meeting. So trying to be present and make the most of it every time that you have wherever you are, it is a good, just staying focused in that. So whether that's work or personal, and actually having that very strict kind of shut off point. So there are points where, I'll leave my phone. It's easier to do when you're outside working. You just leave your phone inside and then it's just gone. So out of sight, out of mind.
Isn't that a good thing?
It is. But you have to, make it a kind of a conscious effort to do that.
Yeah, from a family standpoint, we love to travel. Well, there's nothing better than a cruise where you can turn your phone off and just leave it for 4 or 5 days.
Absolutely. Actually, so I go camping with the horses in Brown County, and you lose service, which is the best, 3 to 4 days I ever have, because you can't do anything about it. So people figure it out. You just, given the opportunity.
All right, let's talk millennials. You are a millennial. What's the biggest misconception out there about millennials?
So we actually did a research project on millennials, just kind of for our own interest and fun.
I was not aware of that.
It's a webinar out there. We actually partner with Element 3 on this, and I think that we have that under our website or on our blog. But it's basically about millennials and comparing to Gen X. And I think one of the biggest findings is that millennials too need to adult someday, and that comes with responsibilities. So the carefree life, I think it extends a little bit longer than maybe what it used to, and that's just a different type of priority. I think millennials in social media are just exposed to so many different things that they see more and want to do more. We asked one question of, what's on your bucket list? And we asked that of Gen X and of millennials. And they were saying similar things, but the context of how they said them was completely different. So a Gen X was more of an accomplishment, like I want to go to every country, I want to visit every continent, or I want to own this car or do this thing. And millennials were, I want to go on a hot air balloon ride over the desert, or I want to go skydiving off a certain cliff in some country. It was very, very tangible and descriptive, which, we made the assumption of social media awareness kind of drives these more tangible type of ambitions. So I think that that's kind of fed into being able to see it, wanting to do more varieties and settling down maybe a little bit later, but they still will. So when we look at older millennials, they're still having families, moving to the suburbs, doing things. It might be a little bit different. But I think that's millennials are, looked at this as whole different type of audience and different type of breed, but really it's not too different. They're kind of going to fall into a similar line because responsibility will take you there eventually.
All right. So at your company, as we said, small but mighty, we were going to keep using that. But again, I'm sure you have people different generations, millennials, other generations. How do you approach that from a management perspective, balancing that out, making sure everyone's working well together?
Yeah, that it wasn't as hard as you would think. This is coming from a smaller team environment too. People generally get along pretty well, regardless of across generations. And we've hired someone. I think she just turned 22, so I think that's even right on the borderline of the next
Gen
generation.
Z.
Yeah,
I've been reading some about that.
So, and I think it's appreciating some of the differences between these generations. So. Funny side story. So a person in our company actually held up a floppy disk to this employee and said, "Do you know what this is?" And she's like, "That's the save icon." Because never really actually seen a tangible. So it's interesting side note, but I think appreciating and kind of and it was a big joke, and it still is. I can see Casey laughing right now of what that is, and appreciating that, knowing that it's different, but everybody still gets along pretty well. I think what has helped is there is different leadership type tactics. So leadership 20, 30 years ago, what people did and what people could, in essence, get away with is not what you can get away with today. So I think leadership training can sometimes help, and we've done that in the company as well, just to help acclimate to this is a new generation, and there is different types of ways to manage and lead, and it's more by example and more understanding the individual and their talents, and you have to respect work-life balance and what that is.
We've talked about some of the evolutions, the changes in the research world. What might be next? Are there certain trends currently or things you're looking at? Here's how things might change, or here's what we have to do different to meet client needs?
Yeah, and I think, market research is going to be an industry that I think is going to change pretty dramatically. I think we've already seen some companies that have more of the model-based black box model having to change because that's just it's not what people buy as much. It's not what people need because you could automate that internally. I think it's going to be more challenging questions, which usually lend itself to more strategy-focused, critical thinking, naturally more of a consultative type. So we've always kind of been that at the heart of it, and I think even further pushing that consultative type and even more so stepping into the company of how we can help. So we've done what we call IDIs or in-depth interviews with the internal staff at a company, and just having those interviews, having them talk and spend 30 minutes outside of their normal job to talk about the corporation and their goals and what they know or hypothesize are conversations that the company doesn't even have. So finding just the wealth of knowledge that people have that aren't even being shared and bringing that together, that can be a simple project that has brought huge change to a company. So I think having more of that in-depth and strategy behind research is kind of where it's going to go. And I think, like I mentioned earlier, qualitative 2.0, right, that's going to be more of the emerging when it's customer focused, what that looks like. And we're even seeing that more in kind of the B2B world. Business decision makers are consumers, that has kind of translated over.
So your organization might become more, and maybe it's already the case, but a longer-term partner, as you say, that outside consultant who's there not just on a particular project, but maybe throughout a much longer period of time.
Absolutely, and we've actually seen that with some of our clients today. Of look, this is something that how we're gonna change the company in the next 5 years. This is what questions we have. What do we need to know? And it's basically, this is what you need to know. We need to understand the benefits of this, the consumer for this, the constructs of this, and basically mapping out with them in partnership how to get there and where research should fall into line. So we're seeing that change. I mean, relationships have always been a thing for us. Well, we have a lot of very tenured clients, and I think 80% of our clients are repeat. But it still has been pretty project-based and episodic. Now it's becoming more part of a longer-term strategy.
Well, Katie, this is the part of the conversation where I usually ask people what they like to do in their spare time. I think we've covered that, but we'll still go in that direction. So talk about, and this is like the ultimate softball question, I think. Talk about your love of nature, of animals. How did you acquire that? And then just what's so special about it?
Mm-hmm. Honestly, I don't know where that came from. It has been since the very beginning. So I was that kid that brought home the bird with a broken wing and said, "Here, Mom, what are we going to do with this?" So my poor mother. So it's always been, taking care of the stray cat that got in a fight. It's always been in me to love animals. So horses kind of started that, then went into cattle. Now we're going to be going into chickens, and I think my goal is to kind of add a new species every year to the hobby farm
All
ranch,
right.
whatever you may call it.
We're going to have to check back then and see what's new to come.
It'll continue to progress. But I think, what I love about animals, and I think it's good when you're in corporate world too and you're leading people, is animals are very different, very honest. So, if they're hurt, they'll tell you, and they won't exaggerate. It's just real. And it kind of takes you out of what that world is, because you have to be, especially when you're dealing with a 1,500-pound cow, you can't be focused on something else. You have to be focused on that 1,500-pound cow.
That sounds like good, solid advice.
Yes.
I agree with that.
So it keeps you focused, and it helps keep your mind off of it. And it's like almost any other hobby. If you're a marathon runner, it clears your mind, and it helps you, I can't do that personally. I admire people that can, but it's finding whatever that hobby is that kind of pulls you away and helps you clear.
So my last question is one I don't typically provide in advance, but you've kind of overachieved here because you've already sort of answered it, but I'll ask it anyway. We do with everybody in this season. Katie, what does success mean to you as you think about, again, whether it's work, whether it's hobby, whether what you're doing outside, but what does success mean to you personally?
Oh, that can be a loaded question. So I've given some talks on leadership before, and leaders are driven by there's like three principles. There's achievement, inclusion, and then kind of power. And I'm just very achievement oriented. So I think success is not just one big overarching goal. I like to just be achieving in every aspect. So that's why, hobby farm isn't just I'm going to have horses. It now has to be I have to have bees and goats and everything else to come with it. And I think it's just the achievement of learning something new and being able to master something else, whether that's bread making or that's company ownership. I think it just runs that. So that's kind of my internal drive towards success. And hopefully, it keeps on going forward. I think, SMARI has, it's exciting where market research is going, and fortunate that we've kind of already been there for the past 35 years. And then you got the whole other side of life with that whole personal thing with the ranch and that sort of thing. So success is continuing. It just depends on what's driving you towards it.
Katie Ittenbach, thank you so much for joining us, sharing your insights today. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tom.
All right. As I mentioned, we're recording this or releasing this 2 days before the Chamber's 30th Annual Awards Dinner, where we honor our business, government, dynamic leader, and community of the year. A couple other Chamber reminders. November 15th is the deadline for the Best Places to Work nominations for the 2020 program. We look to be honoring 125 or more companies in what is the 15th year of that program. Chamber also has our legislative preview on November 18th. That event is at the Hyatt Regency Indianapolis, gives a preview of the legislative session, includes a roundtable discussion amongst the caucus leaders. We'll be back in 2 weeks with our next conversation. We're going to go in depth on Indiana Workforce Recovery, the Chamber and the Wellness Council program that helps employers deal with opioid problems and drug challenges in the workplace. Tremendous progress in that over the last 18 months. We want to share some of that news and information with you. Thank you, as always, for listening to the In Chamber.